Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. When you use Apple Card on your iPhone, you'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Apply now in the Wallet app on your iPhone. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs, Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com.
This episode is brought to you by Global X. Since 2008, Global X ETFs has been committed to empowering investors with unexplored, intelligent solutions. Global X specializes in exchange-traded funds that offer exposure to the artificial intelligence ecosystem, including themes like data centers, robotics, semiconductors, and cloud computing. To learn more about Global X's entire suite of ETFs, from covered calls, fixed income, emerging markets, and more, visit globalxetfs.com.
Welcome to How To, the show where listeners bring us their goals and we find the perfect person to help make them happen. I'm Courtney Martin. Here's a fact that makes my little heart sing out. Did you know that there are nearly 20,000 public libraries in America? Think about all those little kids curled up with picture books, all those elders reading the day's paper, all those people job searching on a public computer. These, of course, are the iconic images of public libraries, but there's a less known or understood aspect of your favorite place to check out a totally free book, and that is the Board of Trustees. Yep, libraries are governed by a local crew of volunteer board members who make sure the money is being spent with integrity and the library's leadership is on it. In fact, all nonprofit organizations are required to have such boards. So when you look around your community at all the beautiful work being done, the YMCAs, the Girl Scouts, the community garden programs, there are committed board members making sure everyone stays on mission. Best case scenario, boards are kind of like the secret superhero teams of our communities. But, of course, not all boards function as well as they could, and there are real pitfalls that can get in the way of a board's mission. So, how do you avoid those and become the best board member you can be? That's the question we got from a thoughtful listener we're going to call Heather.
I'm a small business owner, and right now I'm also on the board of my local public library. It is such a fantastic organization, and I want to be able to do the best job that I can to serve this library.
How did you first become a board member of the library?
I have 2 children, and when they were younger, particularly elementary school aged, they were huge library fans. And so the library was really important in our life, and a board member who was rotating off the board knew about that, and she thought I would be a good fit.
And what was your reaction? Were you like, ooh, I'm into that?
Yeah, I was very honored to be asked because I love the library so very much, and I was surprised, like, oh, you see that potential in me.
It is an honor to be asked to serve on a board, but it's hard to break into if you don't have the right connections. Heather landed her spot on the public library board a few years ago now, but in some ways she's still figuring out her role, especially since the meetings are so, shall we say, efficient.
When we're there for meetings, everybody wants to get down to business and get this stuff done. We want the staff to be able to go home. Everybody who's serving on a board is a busy person. They've been asked to be on the board because of their relevant life experience. And usually that relevant life experience means you have a lot of stuff going on. I think all of us are parents, all of us are professionals. Everybody has a very full life with not a whole lot of extra time. We're trying to do the best job we can with limited time and certainly other resources.
This is not Heather's first tour of duty. She previously served on what is essentially the board of her church. But there are specific rules with a library board that she's still adjusting to.
On a board, you're really supposed to communicate through the executive director. And so I am a library patron. So figuring out, okay, when I'm a library patron, what's an appropriate way to interact with the staff? And I understand why those rules are in place, but just getting a sense of like, okay, so how do I get a sense of what's going on? And how do I function in this environment when my communication is prescribed?
There are so many unknown nuances to how a board functions and what it takes to be a good board member. So I'm bringing in an ace.
Heather, you are thinking a lot like what most of the executive directors I've worked with want their new board members to think. How can I learn more? How can I get more involved? How can I be most helpful? How can I connect with the other board members?
Malini Sridharan was a teacher. She worked in the science field, and now she's at an organization called Wellspring Consulting, which helps nonprofits develop strategies and manage their finances. Essentially, she works with boards all the time and knows what makes a healthy, functioning environment. So she's going to be Heather's guide into this opaque but very important world. And the tour officially starts right after the break. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save more cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states. Apple Card is the perfect card for your holiday shopping. When you use Apple Card on your iPhone, you'll earn up to 3% daily cash back on every purchase, including products at Apple like a new iPhone 16 or Apple Watch Ultra. Apply now in the Wallet app on your iPhone. Subject to credit approval, Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs, Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Terms and more at applecard.com. Okay, we're back. First things first. What the heck is a board, really?
So any nonprofit organization that is a 501c3 and a number of other kinds as well are required to have boards to govern the organization. And so these boards are a group of folks who are usually really passionate about the mission of the organization and or have some experience that could be helpful to the organization, who come together and meet a few times a year to review the work of the organization, think about, potentially strategic directions the organization should go. And really, the board also plays two really important managerial roles. One is they're sort of the boss that the executive director or the CEO reports to. And also, they have to look at the financials of the organization.
Essentially, they're the very top-level minders of the organization. Boards often work as a whole and then split up into committees for the more granular tasks like finances, programs, and fundraising. Super sexy, right? Okay, all kidding aside, underneath all of this bureaucratic jargon are people who are really, really passionate about a mission and making a change.
When you get a really functioning, amazing board are happening at the individual board member level, and it's different for different individuals, is that people are bringing their skills. And boards that are really healthy act as ambassadors for the organization. The board members are talking to funders, talking to other people in the field, telling their friends, if they're community members, like telling people in the community about the work that the organization does. So the board members are really energized and excited.
Okay, so while board members can be wonderful ambassadors for the organization, most of what they do happens out of public view. And one of the best things someone can do is start to develop good relationships with the executive director and their fellow board members.
They know what's going on, they're thoughtful, they bring critical thinking, they provide feedback, but they really, they want to help the organization run really well as opposed to run the organization themselves. That's a balance that really great boards bring, where they bring a lot of critical thinking and they really pay attention, but they also, at the end of the day, know the staff are the ones to do the work. I also think, to one of Heather's points, and one of the challenges she's facing, having a board that's really cohesive, where the board members know each other and can work together really well, can make for a really healthy board.
Okay, so to recap, rule number 1 is to develop good relationships with the other members, the executive director, the staff, fellow board members. Rule number 2 is to recognize you're there to help the organization with thoughtful feedback, but not run it yourself. Now, in order to give good feedback, you need knowledge, and that can be tricky to get.
Reach out to the CEO or maybe the board chair and say, I want to learn more about the programming that the library is doing, or the operations of the library, or, whatever aspect of, the organization that you're interested in. How can I do that? And that may be, a tour. That may be sharing some more program information. Another great way to learn about an organization is joining committees. And I know, Heather, you said you were on a couple of different committees, but you can join committees to share your knowledge and experience, but you can also join committees to learn. And so, I want to be thoughtful and be a participant, but really be a listening member for a little while so that I can learn even more about the organization.
I love that language, listening member, because it kind of sets your mindset for a season. Heather, how's that feeling as you're listening to Molly's suggestions?
That's brilliant. For example, for me, the finance committee feels really big and scary. It feels very intimidating. And I love this language of saying, can I be placed on the finance committee as an opportunity to learn for a year or so? I love that idea.
That does bring up this question of time that you raised, Heather. When I think about humans in groups trying to do everything, it's always like, if only we could slow down. If only we could slow down to get to know each other. If only we could slow down enough to actually take the time to understand what we're doing. I feel like so much of modern life is like pretending like you read the memo and then like skimming it and being like, okay, I think I grokked it and here's my opinion. And I'm worried about, because Heather, you mentioned, work-life balance and you've got these little kids. And so Molly, how do you do all this? How can you be a good board member without it taking over your life?
I mean, I think this is maybe life advice for all people that I find myself giving myself quite often, which is you don't have to do everything all at once. You don't have to bring your expertise to the program committee and be on the, library government governance committee, or, you don't have to do everything. You can say, I've been on this board for a couple years. I feel like I've really contributed in these 3 ways. And now this next, 6 months, this next board cycle, this next year, I want to be learning. I want to, get deeper with the organization. And that's going to be my focus for this year. Part of the beauty of having boards for organizations is that there's multiple people on it. Heather's not the only person who's there to help. So if she wants to shift her focus and think about, I want to learn more about finance this year, that can be her focus. There are other folks to do some of the other work. If you just say, here's the time I have, how can I spend it most wisely, not just for the organization today, but for the organization in the future?
I think that sounds like a manageable way to approach it. This particular library, kind of the norm for the board is that you serve on 2 committees. And so for me to say, and to be upfront with the board chair, I'd like one of my committee assignments to be one, which is a learning opportunity for me, and one in which I know that I can bring a lot of the skills that I have to bear. And that feels like a good balance.
So that's our next rule. Don't try to do everything because that will lead to burnout. Trust your members to also do their share. That way you can contribute and keep learning, which ultimately will strengthen the board for the future. I am on a board for this organization that I co-founded, which I'm sure, Molly, you're like, oh God, that's, sometimes that goes very badly, called the Solutions Journalism Network. And one of the things that I've noticed comes up for me is all these deep questions around ego. Like I'm watching all the board members who, of course, I adore, but we're all humans, participate in meetings. And sometimes I'm like, are we really helping the organization, or are some of us kind of here to feel self-important and feel like we're contributing something that kind of boosts our own ego? So Molly, can you talk a little bit about the role of ego and kind of self-awareness and humility in board service?
Sure. I mean, I think everybody has an ego. And I think, for some people, what might look like, someone having a big ego can sometimes just be somebody trying really hard to be helpful. When I think about a board, I think about these are people who are donating their time to try to help. We've all been in situations where somebody's talking too much. And I've probably been a person who's been talking too much. Like it's just the nature of humanity. You get on a roll and you want to talk. And I think there's a role for board members to play with each other to just facilitate each other and make a conversation go well. If you're on a board and you feel like some folks are going off in a direction that might not be the right direction for the conversation for the day, it might be a great idea and it might be something that's definitely worth thinking about, but maybe table it and talk about it later. Whether you're on the board, whether you're at work, it's always okay to say like, hey guys, that's a really great idea. I think we should talk about that at this time. Or why don't we throw that back to the staff to think about more? So just kind of gently redirect. I think that's just a good facilitation technique generally.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Heather, how do you feel about the facilitation of your meetings?
I would say participating in meetings has been challenging for me for a couple of reasons. I mean, in terms of my participation when I'm at the meetings themselves. I'm the youngest member of the board, for sure. Our meetings move at a very rapid pace. If you have a question, you have to interrupt in order to get your question answered. And often that means interrupting a staff member, which I am not comfortable doing because I am aware of the power dynamic and I don't want to be in a position where I'm interrupting a staff member.
I think, Heather, the organization that you're working with, this library, there is this additional challenge of, in terms of wanting to get into discussion and be vulnerable and ask questions, that it is a public meeting. And there are, there are schools, there are other organizations that also have these requirements that the meeting be public. So you kind of have to think about your board meeting in a different way than a lot of other boards do, where this isn't just about, Heather and Jonathan and Dimitri, like getting really down to understanding something. It's also about informing the public, giving the public a chance to ask questions, giving the staff, the library a chance to share information, not just with the board, but with the public. So you actually have a number of different goals that your meeting is trying to reach. And so it makes sense to me that it would be like, how do I participate in this? A couple of the things I would suggest when you look at the agenda of a board meeting, or if you know kind of what the agendas generally are, one thing to do for participating in board meetings could be to reach out to the board chair or the CEO and say like, hey, I have some thoughts about X. Like, I'd love to have a couple minutes to ask some questions or understand more. You could also, if there's something you really want to understand, go to the CEO or the board chair on the side and just say like, hey, I really want to understand this. I know we're going at a rapid pace. So could you give me some more information to fill me in? As a board member, it can be hard to do this, especially if you feel like you're the newest board member or the youngest board member or the least experienced board member. Part of the role of board members is to run the board, right? And the board chair and the executive committees are usually the people that are making some decisions. If you feel comfortable, go to a board chair if you're on a board and you feel like you want to learn more and you want to participate, but you can't quite, and say like, hey, I'm super excited about this organization. I am so excited to be on this board. I would love to just really have more tools or ability to dig in during board meetings and really ask questions and understand, can you help me think about doing that? Or to go even further and say, I think there's a few of us that are new on the board, and it could be really helpful if we had, 5 minutes of questions, or if we had, some guided discussion in specific places. It is okay as a board member, even if you're coming into something that's relatively established, to say, hey, can we do things a little bit differently? And if you frame it as, I want to be as engaged and as helpful and as best a part of the board as I can be, hopefully you can have a little bit more discussion time or understand how the meeting is working and how to interact a little bit differently.
I think that would feel comfortable. I had an interesting experience with 2 other board members. I did go out for coffee in a small group with a new board member and a board member who joined at the same time as me. It was 2 women and 1 man, and we were talking about things we'd like the board to talk about. And me and the other female board member were kind of fretting about how do we do this? And the male board member said, we can just ask for it to be put on the agenda. That's what we get to do. And it really hadn't occurred to me and the other female board member that, oh, we get to do that. right? Like we were not comfortable with some of that power dynamic of like, we get to set the agenda here too.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a moment where we all kind of laughed at like, that didn't quite occur to us. And we can do that. Yes, I will do that going forward. So this is more encouragement to say, yes, I can ask for more time for questions.
I love that you brought that up, Heather, because I do think gender and race dynamics, among so many others, are at play within boards. And it sounds like, this was one of those moments when it surfaced in an interesting way. Molly, have you seen kind of gender and race, and I'm sure class, of course, dynamics, and how do you see boards dealing with them in a healthy way?
Yeah, I mean, I think those dynamics exist in any heterogeneous group of people. I think really helping people understand and making sure that your board members feel really confident in what they bring to the conversation. I might not have the most, knowledge about how nonprofit finances work, but I have a really strong understanding of the community, making sure that one, the organization's really clear with the board member. Like we want you to help with all these other things, but like we'd love for you to really speak up here. It can be really helpful. So that's something the organization can do for the board member.
That's great.
And I think often people join boards and they're sort of like, kind of like Heather's saying, they're like, I'm so excited and I want to do all these things. What do I do? And if board members really think, what are the skills and experience that I bring? I have something to say in this conversation. Heather, I was laughing a little bit when you were like, oh, I realized I could put something on the agenda. Cause I'm one woman too. And sometimes I'm like, oh, right, I have power here. And just kind of recognizing as a board member, like you were asked to be on this board for a reason. Like it's a chosen thing. Someone wanted you here for a reason. And knowing that and keeping that in your heart, really, that like, I'm here for a reason. Like I'm here because my skills or my experience or my connection to the community or to my communities, to my friends, to my world, my knowledge of government, whatever it is, I'm here for a reason. And I don't have to know everything about the organization. I want to know as much as I can. I want to know enough that I can, have the context. I don't have to know everything or be everything to be a valuable member of this group because I'm bringing XYZ.
There is real power in leaning into and kind of owning your expertise in this setting and being secure in what you in particular bring, and then resolve to learn from the rest of your colleagues who are bringing their own strengths to the table. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll explore how to build meaningful connections with your fellow board members and effectively share your ideas. Even if you think it's a bit overhyped, AI is suddenly everywhere, from self-driving cars to molecular medicine to business efficiency. If it's not in your industry yet, it's coming. Fast. But AI needs a lot of speed and computing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? Time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a blazing fast and secure platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, plus all your AI and machine learning workloads. OCI costs 50% less for compute and 80% less for networking, so you're saving a pile of money. Thousands of businesses have already upgraded to OCI, including MGM Resorts Specialized Bikes and Fireworks AI. Right now, Oracle is offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to OCI. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment. Offer ends December 31st, 2024. See if your company qualifies for the special offer at oracle.com/how-to. That's oracle.com/how-to. oracle.com/how-to. As a winner of Apple Podcasts' Show of the Year award, Code Switch knows that identity is part of every story. Code Switch is interested in how race and identity shape your world in real and confusing and sometimes funny ways. From discussions with comedians of color about what makes a good race joke, to how questions of identity swirl around reality TV, Dungeons and Dragons, and BBLs, Code Switch guides you through all the different spaces that people of color live in and what it's like to navigate them. Code Switch doesn't just talk to you about race and identity in the abstract, it tackles real everyday questions, like how to create boundaries with immigrant parents, or tips on how to speak to family members whose racial views might feel stuck in the Stone Age. Every new episode of Code Switch feels like a love letter to the ways race and identity are always connected, and how your life, no matter who you are, is made richer by thinking through them. Listen now to Code Switch from NPR, wherever you get your podcasts.
When you hear a good idea, it's natural to do a double take. That's what you might do when you hear Discover will automatically double the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. Wait, what? Yep, double the cash back is something so good you might do a triple take. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
Before we get back to today's topic, I wanted to share a listener note we got about our recent episode, How to Be Less Judgy. Colleen writes, the listener asked for a framework for positive self-talk. I immediately thought of parts work, which is the psychotherapy modality called Internal Family Systems, or IFS. I imagine her negative judging is actually a young version of herself with a loud internal voice who just wants to protect her, and who doesn't know that the job she's doing is counterproductive. The person who created the IFS framework says there are, quote, no bad parts. So my advice is to not judge your judging. Instead, imagine it as a young part and give that part the compassion and love you'd offer a child who's having a hard time. Ugh, I love that. No bad parts. Colleen, that is a really interesting piece of advice. We so appreciate you sharing it. We've actually received a bunch of voicemails and letters recently, and I want you to know we read every single one of them and sincerely appreciate them. Thank you to everyone who has reached out, and if you haven't yet, what are you waiting for? Write us at howto@slate.com or call the How To hotline at 646-495-4001. We're back with our expert, Malini Sridharan, and our listener, Heather, who really wants to make connections with her fellow board members at the public library.
Because of our, quorum rules and having to be a public meeting, our gathering outside, unless we're talking about personnel matters, it is constricted. So do you have any tips on building relationships with other board members? Because my experience has been the more comfortable you are with each other and familiar, many times it's easier to get work done quickly.
I mean, you're in a very specific position. I'll just say up front, a lot of boards do have other gatherings or other ways of interacting, dinners or other things like that. So that is one way that people do usually connect. That can also be problematic if it's a subgroup of board members who are always meeting and some folks are left out. I think in a situation like yours, one thing you could think about is, how do I connect with my committee? Do you guys want to grab a coffee after? I think also if there are folks on the board who you feel like you can learn more from about the organization, really genuinely asking them questions, you say, hey, I'm super interested in learning more about finance. I'm thinking about joining the committee as a learning member. Can I have a coffee with you and understand some background in what you do? And use that as a hook to get to know people. I think that also just reaching out and making sure that, in your situation where you can't have social activities in the same way as other folks, getting to know the board chair can be really helpful. Asking the board chair, can we have a coffee? Can we have a chat? That's a person who sort of has their eye on the full functioning of the board and can really help you get to know what's going on and learn about some other members, or might even be able to say like, hey, Heather, you used to work at this company and actually this other board member used to work in the same field in a different state. You might not have known that. You guys should connect. So making sure that you're reaching out to the folks who do know others on the board and can help you connect with others, really substantive reasons to reach out to folks one-on-one or in small groups would be my recommendation.
That's super helpful. I started to do that when a new board member was coming on and he was the only one in his class. I invited another board member to invite him for coffee because I thought, man, that sounds kind of lonely. If I was doing that, I would love to have coffee with some other board members. And so just taking the initiative to continue to do that would be great.
I love that Heather is so focused on these dynamics because boards, like so much of life, are relational, right? The more connections, the stronger the ecosystem. It takes time to build those bonds, which is an investment, but it can pay dividends. If you want to get deeper in relationships, it can be useful to examine what role you play within a group setting. Not just what you bring to the table, but how you function within the dynamic.
In other group situations that I've been in the past, and I think it's playing out here too, I am often the question asker, where I say, oh, can I know a little more about that? Or, that's interesting to me. Can we talk about this more? Then it can be deeply uncomfortable.
Say more about that.
Well, when you are in a position where you're the only one asking questions, people perceive that as judgment or doubting their abilities.
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to caveat what I'm about to say because we have all been at the talk or the, panel discussion where the person says, I have a question, and they have the 30-minute intro to the question. And you're like, do you have a question? Are you going to say something? Or did you think you were the speaker here? So I'm not advocating to be that person, but I do think, that's a difficult dynamic to be in. And ideally, if you do some of the other things we talked about today and maybe brings, that other board member you were at coffee with or a couple folks along with you to try to think about, how can we add more time for questions? How can we make this more of the culture of the board to ask questions? How can we make space for it that can help? But I also think sometimes, if you're in a world where people aren't really asking questions that much, people do feel like, why are you asking me this? Why don't you trust me? Or what's going on here? It can feel that way. And I think really framing why you're asking the question or what you want to know can be really helpful. That's something that I found really helpful in my work because I think I'm also a question asker as a person. So I'm always like, what about this? What about that? And even with individuals that I'm like friends with, sometimes they're like, why are you asking all these questions? I'm like, this is how I engage. This is how I show I care, right? Like I say, wow, what about this? What about that? And that can feel like a lot to some people. So I think, say if you have a question, say that they're talking about a new program they're going to launch to the library, and you have a question about like, well, who is this really supposed to serve? Or you have a question about like, how are we going to push this out? You can say something like, wow, like I would, when my kids were younger or, whatever, I would have been really interested in knowing this. I'd love to understand all the ways we're going to be getting this out to the community. And just a little bit of a preface, like not a big, like, I want to know this because, but a little like, I'm excited about this. That sounds great. Or something about it that's interesting or why you're interested can calm people down a little bit because you're not saying, I really doubt that would work at all. And so I'm going to ask this question, right? You're saying, I think that's a great idea, or I want to understand more about this because. I think that can sometimes be helpful because it gives people context of what the question is and a little direction on how they should answer it, but also makes it clear that like, you're working in the context with them. You're not just diving in with things you want to know that are not, generative to the discussion.
Well, Molly, the other thing you did there that was so interesting, I don't even know if you heard yourself, is you didn't ask a question. Your reframe was, I really want to know more about this. It's so interesting. I interviewed this guy for a different podcast that I hosted named Ted Klontz. And one of his like big things was never ask people direct questions because it makes their nervous systems freak out. Like there's something like primordial about being asked a direct question, which I think the three of us are all direct question askers. But he said it's not about not inquiring. It's about literally formatting the sentence such that it doesn't end with a question mark, but is tell me more about X. Because his theory was that it really did something to our nervous system. So it was so interesting to hear you do that, Molly.
Yeah, I would also add another preface that I find really helpful in all of my professional career and all group meetings is to summarize a little bit what you've heard first, to show people like I was listening and now I want to go deeper in, depending on whether that's appropriate to the question. I think that can also be helpful.
Okay, here's another tip. I find this one fascinating. Be thoughtful about how you ask questions. Questions can be well-intentioned, but the delivery can still put someone on the back foot. At your next meeting, do a little experiment. Try giving a short sentence of context or affirmation before you ask a question. Or, and this is the 202 version, ask a question without actually asking a question. So something like this. Instead of, why did you design the program this way? Say, tell me more about the thinking behind the design of the program. See if the latter helps people feel less defensive in their responses. We've spent a lot of this episode talking about the function of boards and their interdynamics. But a conversation about boards would not be complete without talking a little more about class, because a lot of boards have a pay-to-play mentality, spoken or unspoken.
The library board that I serve on, it is unique amongst many nonprofit boards in that there is not a give-get for the library, which is something that I am grateful for because that most likely would have been a barrier to board service for me. And I've had friends who they had to say, I can't serve on this board because I can't give the amount of money that you expect me to give.
I mean, one thing I'll say is that a number of boards I've seen, even if they have give-gets, will often have board members who aren't necessarily meeting it. Because you get a mix of board members, right? You have some of your board members for whom it's not a burden or for whom this is their top organization they're giving to. And maybe you want some younger folks or some folks from the communities you serve who might not be, someone who can give whatever that number is. And I've seen very different numbers for boards. There are boards with very high give-gets, boards with lower give-gets, there are a number of boards also that don't have a give-get. So I would even move this a bit away from the give-get and just say, it is sort of an expectation that board members, if they're not on a government's board like Heather, will be involved some way in fundraising and will give to the organization. And one of the things I've actually heard quite a few times is, even if you don't have a give-get, people want this to be one of the top charitable priority for their board members. So, whatever you can give at your, for what your income is, they want to know that they're that priority. I think that it is important that board members, on most boards see themselves as, supporting development and supporting fundraising. But there are a lot of ways to do that aren't just giving the big dollars. And I think that's something a lot of board members maybe don't recognize or don't know or, they're worried about. And I think just keeping that in mind that I can help. Like if I'm a 25-year-old person who joined this board because I understand the service population or they wanted, some people from the community, I can go along on a meeting with a big donor and share my excitement and why I'm part of this. I can send a thank you letter as a board member. I can be a part of the development committee and think about strategy. There's so many things you can do.
Molly, if someone's listening and they are not sure their board material, but they are really inspired by the way Heather has gotten involved in her community and really made that commitment, what are some good first steps for them as they think about where to go and how to get involved?
There's so much good to be done in the world. And there's so much you can get back from being involved with a bunch of other people who are also doing that same good and thinking about where your passions lie, what's accessible to you in your community and what level of time and resource you can bring to it and finding something that really fits with what you're able to do can be so rewarding and can be a first step toward, deeper involvement, future board membership, and also great relationships and new friends and new knowledge of the world. There's so much you can get out of it.
Heather, has this been helpful? Any other questions for us before we sign off?
It has been so very helpful. I just really appreciate your perspective, Molly, and the encouragement to ask questions. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yeah, Heather, it was lovely to meet you. And I'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning. The fact that you're even asking how to be a good board member means you're probably going to be a good board member.
Oh my gosh. Thank you.
Thanks again to Heather for writing in and Malini Sridharan for giving us the ins and outs of this little known but important topic. If you're on a board right now and have your own tips for how to make them work better, drop us a note at howto@slate.com or call us at 646-495-4001. That's where you can also share any other questions or conundrums you may have. And hey, share this episode with your fellow board members or someone else you think might find it helpful. That helps us grow this community and help more people. How To is produced by Rosie Belson with Kevin Bendis and Sarah McCrae. Joel Meyer is senior editor and Derek John is executive producer. Merritt Jacob is senior technical director and composed our theme music. Charles Duhigg created the show. Carvel Wallace is my co-host. I'm Courtney Martin. Thanks for listening.